welcome to Just Energy Radio with your host, naturopath and medical intuitive, Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theory that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating, from the swinging of a pendulum to the waves of the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day. Each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is when we take everything in our universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita Louise on a journey through time and space where past, present, and future collide. Today, what you believe may be called into question. What we want to know is, who made up the rules? Be brave and step outside the box. We are about to turn our world upside down and venture into the unknown. Hold on. We are departing our own beliefs and entering alternative realms. Enjoy the possibilities.
Hello, and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into the show today. Well, today we're going to be talking about the ancient technology of Peru. And to do that, we're going to be speaking with Brien Foerster and Christopher Dunn, both experts in different areas. Brien is an expert in Peruvian structures and mythology and law, and Christopher is a machinist. But we're going to get a little more information from both of them here in a second. Don't forget, Just Energy Radio is brought to you by soulhealer.com and the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's appliedenergeticsinstitute.com, where you can get information about medical intuition, energy medicine training, and clairvoyant readings. Ooh, it's a little bit early for me today. Anyway, you can also go to the Just Energy Radio website. That's www.justenergyradio.com to check out all of our archives. We've had Brien and Christopher on the show before, and you can listen to the earlier shows that we've had with them. So let me introduce our guests today, and we're going to get started because we have a lot of material to cover. The study of the Inca culture led Brien Foerster to write a book, A Brief History of the Incas, and is also actively engaged in the native Shipio people from the central Amazon of Peru, promoting the sale of their traditional arts and crafts. In addition to his now 4 books, he has written articles for Graham Hancock. He is also associated with Lloyd Pye of the Star Child Project, who is analyzing the DNA of the elongated human skulls of Peruvian Paracas culture on his behalf. Brien will be joining David Hatcher Childress and Hugh Newman of Megalomytha, I cannot even say that word, on a tour of Peru and Bolivia, and that's already come and gone. So I guess his bio is just a little bit old. So cancel that part, but I'm just going to throw this in. But Brien and Chris are going to be doing a tour of Peru in August, which we're going to talk a little bit about in a minute. Christopher, on the other hand, has an extensive background as a master craftsman, starting as an apprentice at an engineering company in his hometown of Manchester, England. Recruited by an American aerospace company, he immigrated to the United States in 1969. Beginning as a skilled machinist and toolmaker, he has worked at almost every level of high-tech manufacturing, from building to operating high-powered industrial lasers, including the position of project engineer and laser operations manager at Danville Metal Stamping, a Midwest aerospace manufacturer. He's now a senior manager at that company. So please welcome to Just Energy Radio, Brien Foerster and Christopher Dunn. Hey, guys. How are you doing?
Fine, thanks.
I'm doing great. Thank you, Rita.
Hey, thanks for coming on the show. I think this is going to be really interesting because we're going to get this kind of blend of, social and cultural and historical along with technical, and I think it's just going to make for a very interesting conversation and dynamic. But to start, I want to start with you, Chris. The work you've done in the past has really been, and the focus of your last 2 books has been surrounding the construction of statuary and temples in Egypt. What's drawing your attention to looking at what's going on in Peru?
Well, that's a very good question, and my studies have been mostly in Egypt. I've traveled in Egypt 9 times and done a lot of research there. I have 2 books, the Giza power plants, and my last book, Lost Technologies of Ancient Egypt. But I first went to Peru and Bolivia in 2005 with David Hatcher Childress, and what I normally do when I go to an ancient sites is to look at the works that these ancient people did, and to see, essentially what level of technology they may have been using, the amount of difficulty in their craftsmanship, and essentially if there are any what I consider to be signatures of advanced machining or advanced methods of manufacture. I found it in Egypt. I mean, it's all over Egypt, and everybody, most people recognize now that the ancient Egyptians were highly advanced, and there's information that was being discussed about Peru and Bolivia that seemed to indicate that they too were also advanced. But before I could comment on that, I had to go there. And so in 2005, I went through Peru, went to all the major sites, which we will be visiting in August. And they did some amazing things. I mean, it is a huge mystery in Peru and Bolivia. The level of technique that they used was surprising to me. And as I went through Peru, I couldn't really relate what they had done with how the Egyptians were cutting and moving large pieces of stone. Their constructions are simply mind-blowing in a way. Particularly when you look at the amount of stone that they had cut very precisely and fitted together almost like a jigsaw puzzle. And you stand in front of these massive walls with 100-ton pieces, and you scratch your head as far as, how did they cut these so precisely? How did they even lift them and put them into position? All these questions come to mind. But the true precision that we find in Egypt, I wasn't really finding that much in Peru, except for ultra-flat surfaces. They did have some elements, particularly at Ollantaytambo, where they have ultra-flat surfaces. Also, you find it at the Coricancha in Cusco. So these sites had ultra-flat surfaces.
And what I was thinking of doing is that we would kind of do like a little virtual tour of some of the different sites. But before we do that, I understand that you guys are kind of working on doing a tour in South America, in Peru, and going to a number of these sites. Kind of, do you want to talk about that for a second? What you're planning?
Sure, go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, we've figured out that we're going to do this August 1st to August 10th. And that will start in Cusco and make its way all the way to Puma Punka in Bolivia. And then after that, we're having a 4-day extension if people choose to join with us, much like we did with Megalithomania, where we went to Nazca and the Paracas area on the coast. And about 90% of the people on the Megalithomania tour did join us for that one. So 14 days in total.
And it seems like in that 14 days, you're covering a lot of territory. It makes it sound like all of these sites are really not all that far apart from each other, that you can do so many in 14 days.
Yeah, that's true. Of course, compared to places like the United States or Canada, which are monstrously huge countries. Peru's quite small, as is Bolivia, and fortunately for us, Puma Punka and Tiwanaku are only about half an hour from the Peruvian border. So it's we do, at least with megalithomania, we packed a lot in every day. And the major remark that people had at the end was that they were so happy because we basically saw everything they'd ever heard of. And more.
And more.
Yeah, it was 9 o'clock in the morning until 8 o'clock at night. But it's just because I'm insanely interested in these places that I could go practically every day to them. And that became very infectious with the people. We were also very fortunate to have on that trip. We had a couple of geologists and we had 2 engineers, and that's what I wanted because I'm not really an expert in anything, and I like to think of myself being humble enough that if I can't answer something, I'll find the expert, and that's where I'm very excited that Chris is coming because Chris is an expert, and as far as I'm concerned, he is the number one in the world in terms of my choice of who I would like to visit these sites with.
Cool.
Oh, shucks. Brian.
I'm not worthy. Well, you know what? But I think you guys make a really great combination because, Brian, I kind of see you as being the cultural, historical, mythological piece of it, because of your time there and what you've looked into. And Chris is kind of the technical end, and I think those two aspects would blend into a really nice broad picture of what's going on down there.
Well, I think Brian brings a lot to the table, and it's not just in the area of the cultural history, but also he's a craftsman himself, and so he doesn't really talk that much about that, but he knows about crafting, and he understands the concepts of precision and the concepts of what could be machine made and what can be made by hand. So he adds a lot of value in the technical area too.
Well, okay. Everybody pat yourselves on the back, but we're going to start our virtual tour now. Okay. So let's start in Cusco. So, Brian, I'm going to kind of rely on you for some historical information. What can you tell us about Cusco? History, mythology, anything?
Well, the standard story is that the Inca originated around Lake Titicaca, which is where we find Tiwanaku, for example. And they left there about the year 900 AD because of a number of factors, including there was a 50-year drought that existed in that area of Lake Titicaca, and so they basically ran out of food. And the population of the Tiwanaku area was supposedly at least 250,000 people, and could even have been 1 million, and now it's just a little village. So that was devastating. And then some tribal people called the Wari basically chased them out, and so they headed north, and where they headed was the Sacred Valley, which is just outside of Cusco, and supposedly formed Cusco around the year 1200. And so that's what all of the standard academic texts say. But if you start reading the oral traditions of the people, it becomes much more complicated, and they talk of civilizations existing long before that. So that, in fact, the Inca basically rediscovered Cusco, and that's more and more what we're seeing the more we look, is that there are buildings, especially the Coricancha, which Chris mentioned, which clearly was there prior to the Inca, because it's stated as being the first building that the Inca made, and technically it is a masterpiece of stone shaping technology. So the more you go to Cusco, the more it becomes glaringly apparent that the Inca were not the sole or first inhabitants. Somebody else was there. The trouble is we don't have a clue what name they, what they were called. But that's what keeps driving me back there, is because the city itself, teases you constantly to solve what it is.
When you are in Cusco, are there very many buildings that have that kind of rock work, or is it just one or two? What kind of how many are we talking about?
Well, the most astonishing thing, and again, it's after, I've been to Cusco 15 times, and the more you visit it, the more glaring the difference in architectural styles are there. There's my favorite corner, which I'm sure Chris has seen, which is just outside of the Coricancha. You see three very distinct forms of masonry all in the same corner. And so you see megalithic out of green andesite, and then you see smaller stones which are tightly fit together right next to it out of, I believe it's basalt. And then after that, it's fieldstone with adobe or mud mortar, and this is within a space of about 10 feet. Mm-hmm. So when they say, well, the Inca, built all of this, in the course of, possibly 300 years, you say, well, how could their building style be so glaringly different? Because there's even a road, an ancient Inca road called. I can't remember right now what it's called. But you look at the right-hand side, and then you look at the left-hand side. And theoretically, it's basically two walls. And you think, well, this would be built at the same time. But even a novice like me can look at it and go, somebody, it's a very different form of technology was used to build one versus the other. And that's, it becomes more and more as you walk through the ancient streets of Cusco, you just see it over and over again.
Chris, when you look at some of the stonework, the megalithic stonework that down there, that kind of puzzle piece work, what is evoked in your mind? I mean, other than how the heck did they do that?
Precisely, how the heck did they do that? When obviously, before you visit a place, you look at a lot of photographs, and I viewed a lot of photographs, and I had certain preconceived notions about what I would find, but at the same time, there were reservations in my mind, which generally are related to my experience in manufacturing, where things are not always as they appear to be until you actually put your hand on it and take measurements. In other words, we can't sell our products based on a photograph. We have to be able to show our customers that they meet certain specifications with respect to geometry, dimensions, precision, etc. So for me, to look at a photograph of some stonework, it's a teaser for me. And essentially what I find that I need to do, and I'm compelled to do, is to actually take measurements. Because until you know exactly what something is, it's very hard to describe anything about it, particularly what it was used for. So in terms of the Inca or the pre-Inca stonework around Cusco, as Brien said, you have the different styles. And when you go to Ollantaytambo and up to the Sun Temple, you find Inca stonework mixed in with these megalithic ancient stones made out of granite that weigh probably about 100 tons. And when you see the difference between the two styles, you don't even have to be vaguely switched on to come to the understanding that you're talking about two totally different cultures. And so if the fieldstone or the smaller elements that are put together were Inca, then the larger megalithic blocks that were so precisely fitted could not be Inca. Because generally a culture that learns a superior method of construction will not resort to a more primitive method. They will continue to evolve their technologies and techniques and continue to build using the knowledge that they have learned. But it's an interesting place. It's a fascinating place. I didn't think that I would actually become as intensely interested in Peru as I have in Egypt, because my times in Egypt have been certainly very productive and inspiring. But and I really didn't see that the Peru and Bolivia would have that same kind of attraction to me. But as I delve deeper into it, it's a very mysterious place, and and I find also that the people I'm with on tours, particularly engineers and technical type people, get the most out of a visit there, because it really sparks their brains to think how it could have come to be. But
when you look at the stonework there, I mean, granted, a statue of Ramses that is carved is obviously different than the stonework used in these walls, but do you see a similar level of precision being used?
That's a very good question. I consider the Ramses statues as being a very superior manufacturing, using very advanced techniques to create it. To actually recreate something like that today would be enormously difficult. We could do it, but it would cost a lot of money, and it would be enormously difficult. And we would be employing all the tools that we have at our disposal in our modern day. When we go to Peru, and you look at the say Saksayhuaman, that zigzag wall at Saksayhuaman, that is a masterpiece, but in a very different way, in that it is like a crossword or a jigsaw puzzle, where all the joints are so finely fitted, but there's nothing regular about it. And trying to make sense of it, to say, did the ancients that built this wall, did they have a certain plan? Was there a certain geometric protocol that they were, holding to? And you can't find that. I haven't been able to find it at Saksayhuaman. Maybe somebody will someday, but it seems as though the wall was built to withstand seismic forces, because when you look at the way the joints are made and the way they interlock, you can see that the wall would hold tightly together regardless of what forces were acting on it. So that has risen, elevated the speculation that it was built for seismic purposes. How it was done, I mean, I have ideas about how they could have accomplished that. But as far as the use of machinery, I can't really, machinery as we know it today, and the way axes on a particular machine tool will work, they work in straight lines, and there are no straight lines on any of those joints. Right, Brien?
Okay, good point.
Yeah. Actually, if I can just add to that, one intriguing thing about Saksaywaman, which most people will be scratching their heads. But if you imagine you have a bag of marshmallows, and you take the marshmallows out and make a row, and then squish them together, and then build another row on top of them, and you squish them into different shapes, but you tightly squish them. That's what Saksaywaman looks like. But what also is there is a number of pictograms. So if you have the right, guy from Cusco, what they can show you is they can show that in some places the wall stones in the wall form the shapes of animals like llama, fish, the paw of a puma, and things like that. And there's another wall in Cusco, which is called the Inca Roca Wall, and it's the same thing. It has a serpent and then on top of the serpent is a puma, and on top of that is a condor, all made with this astonishingly precise fitting of stone.
Cool. Brien, one last question before we totally go to Saksaywaman regarding Cusco. Has they done any excavations beneath the buildings?
No, that's a great question. As far as I know, they haven't. And that's a problem that we have in terms of, the automatic thing, question people will say is, well, where are the tools? And what we do know is that the Inca did not have the tool technology to be able to shape a lot of this stone, because they had bronze chisels and stone hammers. That was about all they had, and wooden wedges for splitting stone. But the hardness, the so-called Mohs scale, which goes from 1 to 10, where diamond is 10, a lot of this stone is between 6 and 7, so it's very hard stone. And so we simply don't know who or how it was done, and that's why Chris is essential to come, because I do give tours quite often to Cusco, and people want to know how it was done, and it's like, I don't know.
You have a mission, Chris. But I just wonder, because if there is a solid foundation in those buildings and they excavate under, they might find a different dating as well. They might find some kind of organic remains, beneath that surface that they could carbon-14 date that might be more than like 1,000 years old or 1,500 years old or whatever date they try to associate with it.
Well, the amazing thing about, for example, the Coricancha is that Cusco is a major seismic zone. There was a devastating earthquake in 1950, and there was a church that was still there, more or less built on top of the Coricancha, and a major portion of that fell down and exposed these walls, so-called Inca walls, for the first time in almost 500 years. So the church wanted to rebuild it, and the city fathers and mothers of Cusco said no, thankfully. And so the thing is that, the Spanish construction, which is, European construction with mortar and stone, it fell down. The Coricancha underneath didn't move at all, or if it did move, the whole thing moved as if it was one piece of stone. And I think that's what Chris is getting at when he talks about being built for seismic reasons. These buildings are so tight that when there's an earthquake, the whole building moves and sways as if it is a single block.
Yeah, I don't know if I could add something to that, Brien. I don't know how valid this information is, but somebody was talking about at the Coricancha that the walls were actually rode on the little round balls, stone balls, so that if the earth did move, that the walls were able to float. But that was just some information I picked up when I was at Cusco.
Well, one thing I can just quickly add to that is I've heard that, which is quite possible. But one thing that we can see is that the Inca Roca wall, which is quite close, is that there are a number of shims in the bottom of the wall where the wall and the road meet. And so that's been explained to me by local native people, that when an earthquake happens, these little shims are basically spat out, allowing the wall itself to rise and fall, and afterwards they simply would shove the shims back in again.
Well, it's a fascinating place, and there's all kinds of there's plenty of room for creative minds to go down there and add their own voice and try and fathom out the puzzle.
So let's move down to Saksaywaman. And there you were talking about the zigzag wall. And from the pictures, it's kind of hard to tell, so I'm just going to ask the question. It seems as if the stonework in Cusco is actually smaller stones than the stonework that is in Saksaywaman. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And people do like to throw numbers around. quite often impossible numbers. But I've measured the largest stone at Saksaywaman, and based on its volume, you take that and you calculate, as in how many cubic feet it would be, and then you multiply that by how much the material weighs per cubic foot, and you come up with a figure of 120 tons. So that's like 60 or 80 automobiles. So it is monumental in size, and the largest megalithic stone structure I've ever seen.
And I'm sure it came from like 200 miles away, and they rolled it in on some wooden rollers up a hill around the corner in place, right? According to, historians.
Yeah, that's actually more Ollantay Tambo. Supposedly the stone for Saksaywaman came from reasonably close by, but it's just the magnitude of it. Even if you had thousands of slaves, which the Inca didn't have, that's a whole thing that I'm debunking. I've read every Spanish chronicle and every account of oral tradition I can get my hands on to try to piece this whole thing together. And the Inca did not have slaves, so that theory goes out the window. You honestly have to be there and look at it, and that's why people like Chris, and I and everyone are just bewildered.
Saksayhuaman is a very interesting place. When we look at the Inca slide, which is as far as direction, would that be to the south of the wall, Brian, or?
That's north.
North, sorry, but it's an extrusive rock, and you can see where it had pushed up through the bedrock, and the scour marks can be seen on this extrusive rock. On the north side of it is a slide, or an area where people actually slide down, and it's a very fascinating place. But another thing something that Brian has been studying extensively are these cutouts in the rock, and they're kind of very mysterious and puzzling to me. Why this ancient culture saw fit to actually make these cutouts for seemingly no rhyme or reason. The only thing that you can really come up with is maybe it had some ceremonial purpose, but definitely not quarry marks by any means, because they're very careful cuts, aren't they, Brian?
Yeah, and just to give people a visual idea, some of these are, basically the size of refrigerators, and it's as though out of a rock wall someone has cut this giant cube out, the size of a refrigerator, and the corners are always have a gentle curve to them too. So it's it looks almost as though a router has gone through and done this shaping. It's just extraordinary, but that's one aspect that most tourists don't see, and that's why my tours are a little different than the conventional tours, because most guides in Cusco say that the Inca built everything, but when you ask questions such as, someone like Chris would ask, as how did they do this, how did they do that, they simply can't answer the question.
Chris, when you look at those stones in Saksaywaman, do you see any tool marks on them, or are they, pretty pristine? I mean, weathered, but pristine.
Well, what you see on the wall, the front of the wall, is like it's almost like unfinished stone, just raw bedrock, and then a cut that goes down to the joint, which is finally fitted with the next stone. But the right where the face of the two stones meet, you'll see maybe some hammer marks or chisel marks that have been used to chip away the material so that a common line is achieved between two adjoining blocks. As far as the joint themselves, there are some blocks that you'll find where you can visual the area of where the joint would be, and they don't. There doesn't appear to be any tool marks on those. It has given rise to a lot of speculation on how it was done. I know that there have been studies by academics on how these blocks were cut and fitted together. The conventional theory is that they used a harder stone to bash the block out, and that kind of theory is they support that theory with the evidence that the joints on the adjoining blocks do not go all the way through to the back of the stone. That there's just a small area at the front of the face of the stone where these joints are actually so precise. Other theories are that they use sun dishes to burn the stone, or they call it ablation, where you direct sufficient heat to elevate the temperature of the stone, and it will basically explode away from the material.
And what kind of temperature are we talking about to make these stones explode, roughly?
I really can't answer that question. I think I don't think that has been demonstrated successfully. There was a researcher called Watkins, I believe his name is, who he participated in a documentary about 20, maybe 30 years ago. It's been a long time, but he did some experiments with a dish, a reflective dish. I don't think he achieved that much success with it. So it's very difficult to come up with a true method. And when you look at the surface of the rock itself, it doesn't look vitrified, and it doesn't look like it's been melted or anything like that. It looks like it's just been cut. So the tool marks are a bit of a puzzle. The method, what they how they were guided, that's another puzzle. I think there are some answers to there are ways that you can do that if you have the blocks lying down rather than trying to fit them when they're stood up. If you build a frame and you're actually able to craft the block and then just slide it into position to fit it to the adjoining block without having to lift it up. It's just roll it in on maybe rollers and fit it that way. And then once you've got all your stones fitted on the ground, laying flat, then you fit them in the wall. You build the wall up, so you don't have to do any cutting after that. You just elevate the blocks and they fit together perfectly. So that's just a possible way that they could have been done. It would certainly make it a lot easier for us to do it, that's for sure.
I can't even imagine us doing it. One last question before I go back to you, Brien. In the joints, or either of you can answer, in the joints, because you said this wall is zigzag, so when you have a zig in the zag in that corner, do you find the same level of precision of these two angled surfaces coming together and the blocks being cut to fit appropriritely? Especially the internal zigs, not the external zigs. Zag.
Take it away, Chris. That's a technical question.
The internal zigs?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
Well, you said that the structure is zigzag, so there are the pointed parts of the zigzag, and then there's the internal bend where the walls meet. Do you find the same level of precision in those joints as well?
Yes, and the interesting thing about the internal corners is that some of the blocks actually fold around the corners, so they can be going, say, directed south, and then they will be directed east. But the same megalithic block will form a part of the of both the walls. So there's a right angle at the bottom of it.
Cool.
Yeah, and the external stones wrap around, and the internal stones, the internal walls, the internal corners are wrap around too. And you find that also in Egypt. There is the Valley Temple at Giza that has these re-entry angles on them, where one stone forms a part of both sides of the wall.
Interesting. Brien, we didn't really talk about what this structure, site, there, I always like to joke around. There's what they say it's supposed to be, and then there's like what the real people know. So what do they say it was supposed to be, and then what does, the indigenous culture say it's supposed to be?
Well, they basically say that Saksaywaman was a fortress because it's on top of a hill. And that is something that the Spanish wrote. One thing to take into consideration is the fact that the early Spanish chroniclers, of course, learned their information from the native Inca descendants. So any knowledge would have gone from the Quechua language to the Spanish language, and then when we read it, it goes into the English language. So there isn't necessarily, a clean translation going through. And what I'm speculating now is that it's said that one specific Inca ruler, had it built. But I think it may be a language misinterpretation because you see so many different styles there. You do see what we know now is the Inca style. So I think the translation was messed up a little, and rather than saying that Pachacutec built Saksaywaman, it was probably Pachacutec built at Saksaywaman, and that the other, especially the big wall, which actually has three tiers. The largest stones are the first tier, and then there's a second and a third, and that the Inca definitely built a lot of things there, but the first. Those three walls are spoken of as having been built by so-called giants. And again, whether giants mean giant people or giants as in giant minds, we don't know. But it's clearly, indicated that somebody else was responsible, because the Spanish were in complete shock when they saw it, in their very racist way, saying, you couldn't have built this. And the Inca said, no, we didn't.
I love the Spanish chroniclers. They crack me up.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, this wall, is it a terrace thing, or is it actually like a wall around that you would think of like a castle wall? Is it empty on the backside, or is there actually like a terrace that it's kind of holding up? Really hard to tell from pictures.
Yeah, it looks like a terrace in that way. As I said, three distinct levels. It's one zigzag wall with two on top of it. And the amazing thing is there's a oral traditions expert, Jesus Gamarra, who lives in Cusco, and he guided me around Saksaywaman for one day, and he said that actually the whole hill that Saksaywaman is on is a pyramid. And as we walked down through the steep streets to get down back into Cusco again, we walked into a restaurant that had the same construction, and he said this also is part of Saksaywaman. So he believes that a lot of the megalithic wall is buried and still exists there. Saksaywaman could be much bigger than we think it is.
But not really any plans to do any work there, really.
No, they don't. They do very little work in any of these structures. They're doing some at Saksaywaman now, and it's quite a huge site, and a little bit at Ollantay Tambo, which is like 1,200 acres in size. It's huge. But the Peruvian government isn't all that big on spending money on archaeology, unfortunately. Machu Picchu is kept pristine, but the rest of them, kind of sit there, which saddens me.
It seems like, however, that there's been a lot more interest, and I don't know if it's the 2012 thing or what, but in South America, in Mayan and Aztec and Peruvian Inca cultures, that you would think there would be more, colleges or organizations that would want to come in and do work if they got permission.
Well, yeah, there is, but without getting too political, getting permission is very difficult. And with the present economic situation, especially in the U.S. and Europe, there just isn't, I guess, money for it. There's, centuries worth of archaeology to do in Peru and Bolivia.
Yeah, but just think how fun that would be.
Well, the thing that scares me the most is going to these places and not seeing something that I haven't seen before. And every time I go to these places, I always see something and smack myself in the head saying, why didn't I see that? It goes on forever, this stuff.
Cool. Chris, one last question before we move on from Saksaywaman. Would it be possible for us to build a wall or replicate this wall today?
Would it be possible? It would be enormously expensive. I believe it would be possible, but it would be enormously expensive. And getting the resources to do it, I'm not sure that we will be able to do that. But I mean, you could say that for most of the sites that you visit, these ancient construction, that my belief is that they must have had some kind of lifting technology that we haven't quite been able to recapture. Because it's almost as though they were moving these multi-ton blocks around with relative ease. And when we think about primitive cultures and how even going back to the Spanish and, the Europeans, they didn't select 100-ton elements in their construction. They would select smaller elements. Even the more advanced construction styles that you see in Cusco by the Spanish, as opposed to the Inca, they're all small elements compared to the megalithic, huge multi-ton blocks that the pre-Incas were using. So it's my firm belief that what we have from the past, from history, is a world, a knowledge that was prevalent in the world at large, and that was how to lift multi-ton blocks with relative ease, because when you go further back in time, that is how they built. That's how they built their constructions with the obelisks in Egypt, the Jupiter Temple at Baalbek, where you have the 1,200-ton stone. Everything is megaton construction, and how do they lift them into place? I mean, that is the huge puzzle. I think we can certainly figure out how to cut them, or how to craft them, but actually lifting them into place is another matter altogether.
When you look, and this is for either of you, when you look at the stonework, like at Saksaywaman or some of the other sites that are in South America, that megalithic construction, and compare it to like the construction in Egypt on the pyramids, or a Temple of Jupiter would be another good example, do you get a sense that, perhaps the stonework that's in South America might be older, just based on style? Ignoring the dates. Let's, just move those to the side, and just based on what you're seeing.
Well, I can say that from my perspective, Egypt, whether you're in Egypt and in England, near Stonehenge, or Baalbek, Göbekli Tepe is also has been found to be many thousands of years older than even the pyramids, reported to be. And I think there's a lot of confusion in dates. And I think the clue to answering the question about age has to be in the technology that was being used. And I definitely believe that this culture was ancient, but I also believe that the ancient Egyptians were also an ancient culture, or the Cometians as they were known at that time. How old? That's another question. I mean, some people push the dates back to over 10,000 years. The Egyptian pre-Egyptian culture back 35,000 years or 36,000 years. So it's hard to say because when we look at the cataclysmic events that have occurred on our planet, I can envision a civilization, even our civilization, is at risk of cataclysmic forces just totally wiping us off the face of the map. And we talk about that. We speculate about what would happen to our civilization should that happen, and we accept that it would be an extinction event, and there won't be much left after a few hundred years. It's very difficult for us to accept that the same thing happened to advanced cultures in prehistory, or that prehistoric cultures rose to a level of technology that we find extremely challenging today when we're looking at it. But I think that the culture that shared this technology, as particularly the lifting and carrying technologies, probably existed around the same time, or they were sharing the same information.
Okay. Any comment, Brien, before we move on?
Well, definitely. The more that I, research it and think about it and ask people about it, there is this recurring theme of a global flood. Even in the oral traditions of the people of the Andes, they speak of that there was a great flood that devastated and destroyed the so-called giant culture. And I have no qualms whatsoever to believe that some of these structures predate 10,000 years. The thing is that there's a natural prejudice that we have, thinking that we are the greatest, the most sophisticated people of all time. And in almost any native tradition, they speak of, and I've studied many different native cultures. They always say that civilizations are basically like waves, or everything comes in or happens in cycles. And so I have no, as I say, no qualms whatsoever to go back to 12,000 or whatever age, because the evidence is staring us in the face, in stone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's jump to Tiwanaku. So I'm going to just leave it with you, Brien, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about the history, mythology that's associated with that location.
Well, it's so intriguing. Tiwanaku and Puma Punka are both located on the same, it's the same site basically. They're just given different names. About 90% of the people who go to Tiwanaku, which is in the Altiplano, which is the high area, approximately 12,000 foot altitude. It's less than 10 miles away from Lake Titicaca now, and the conventional story is that its construction started in the more or less about 2,000 years ago. But I was just there with David Childress, filming Ancient Aliens in November with Hugh Newman, and every time I go there, it's just the place just bewilders me because the level of possible technology that would have been employed is simply mind-blowing. As Chris said, I have some technical aspect because I was a precision cabinet maker, as in furniture maker, and in that, a millimeter is a big distance. 90-degree cuts mean 90 degrees. If you're at 89 or 91, you've made a mistake. So at least my eye is trained enough to be able to see precision when I'm looking at it. And Tiwanaku and Puma Punka just are odd.
Well, and I want to do Puma Punka separate because I got a bunch of questions for Chris. So we'll come back to that. But when I look at images of Tiwanaku, I mean, they just seem very bizarre. Like there's this kind of hodgepodge of construction going on.
Yeah, well, the thing is there, and it's also true in the Sacred Valley and Cusco and many places, you see obvious evidence of the fact that many cultures with different ways of approaching construction existed, and that's why often these places look like a mess when you really look at them, especially Cusco, again, where you see very rough adobe next door to literally next door to megalithic building. And when the conventional scholars say, well, it all happened over the course of 300 years, nobody either evolves or devolves that fast. So the thing about Tiwanaku is that my belief now is that there were very distinct periods of building there, and I personally call the first age of building the Puma Punka period, because you see the exact same style of work in stone at Tiwanaku as well as at Puma Punka, and that's in so-called diorite, which it's not technically diorite, but it's a very hard gray stone. And next you find a lot of red sandstone construction, and then after that, adobe. The so-called diorite comes from 90 kilometers away, whereas the sandstone comes from about 10 kilometers away. It looks like a mess, but that's why it's so intriguing, because you just find so many odd things, like 6 feet, walls of mud, and then you'll see this huge chunk of precision stone sticking out of it, as if a flood occurred.
Okay, and you know what? We need to take a break here, and so why don't we go ahead and do that now, and then come back with some more questions about Tiwanaku, as opposed to going, got to take a break. In the middle while somebody's talking about something. Sound good?
Sure.
And hopefully the music will come up and we can go to break. Anyway, this is totally fascinating, guys, and I'm so glad that we got you two together. And, I guess it's not playing because the button's not working. You just got to love it. One of my chat room people says, you need an engineer. It's like, yeah. Okay, guys, so remember, I can't mute your mic. So I'm Dr. Rita Louise. We're here talking with Brien Foerster and Christopher Dunn, but we're going to be back after these words from our sponsors.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages.